All right. So have you ever heard the words press on? Has someone ever told you that? Hey, you just need to press on. Have you ever told yourself that in an instance where you said, man, I'm just going to have to press on in this? Is that a word? I don't know if that's a word we use very often, a phrase we use, but we're going to look at this goal that Paul the Apostle had, right? And he tells us about here in Philippians chapter 3. We're going to talk about that this morning. But I first want to just kind of think about what is it that you think about when you hear that phrase? Because I want to make sure we're thinking right about this. I think that many of us, when we hear the word press on, that phrase, we think of something kind of like the story of the HMS Endurance and a wildly unsuccessful but incredibly miraculous expedition to Antarctica by Sir Ernest Shackleton. If you're not familiar with it, I'm going to tell you just the briefest of details. There's plenty of books and things you can read about this incredible story. Okay, but so Sir Ernest Shackleton, he was a already knighted and a great explorer at the time. But in 1914, he recruited 28 men to go on the HMS Endurance to Antarctica. And what he wanted to do is he wanted to be the first person to cross that frozen continent. No one had ever done it at that point, and he wanted to be the first. And that was going to be the crowning achievement of his career. But almost immediately upon arriving down in the Weddell Sea, it became obvious that the Endurance was not going to make it to the location that they had chosen for their launching point across the continent. It just wasn't going to happen. The sea was far too frozen, but Shackleton, he pressed on. He pressed on. And the ship soon became icebound. And so the crew had to get off the ship and kind of make camp and kind of live on and off the ship for a long time, hoping that they could, the ice would recede or they could break it free. But eventually, not only did the ice not loosen its grip, it actually started to crush the hull of the HMS Endurance, making it completely unseaworthy and eventually sinking it to the bottom of the sea. And so here they were, not on land, on an ice floe that had broken free now at this point, at sea. And as you can imagine, a lot of hard decisions had to be made to survive for those 28 men. A lot of them were made by Shackleton. He made a lot of those hard decisions for them. All they had were 3 lifeboats and whatever they had been able to get off the Endurance at that point. And this ever-shrinking ice floe, right, began to eventually, and this is after months of living like this, begins to completely break apart. And so they had to, of course, take to the lifeboats, and eventually try to find land somewhere nearby. And if you're trying to imagine this in your head where this is all the way at the very southern tip of South America near Antarctica, obviously. And so here they are, 18 months at sea at this point. They're in these 3 lifeboats, they're barely surviving, and they finally make it to a small place called Elephant Island. Right? The only problem is Elephant Island is uninhabited. And here they are still on the tip of Antarctica on this uninhabited island. And so in order to survive even further, they realized that someone was going to have to go further. And so Shackleton pressed on. He took 4 men in one of those lifeboats and made an 800-mile trek back to the island that they had been their final point before getting to Antarctica. And that is the island of South Georgia. I'm not talking about almost Florida, okay? Talking about South Georgia, an island way down there in the Antarctic Sea. So Shackleton pressed on, and he made it to that island. And it was an amazing thing that they made it there. The only problem was they landed on the wrong side of that island. And if you don't know, the uninhabited side of that island is traversed by a huge mountain range to the other side of the island. And at this point, that boat wasn't going to make it on the island. And so Sir Shackleton had to press on. He took 2 men out of that 4-man crew that he had, and they walked across, they traversed that mountain range, full of glaciers and frozen waterfalls, had no map, they had no idea how they were going to make it or how they were going to do it. But they finally made it to the other side of South Georgia, this island, made it to the whaling station there. And then from there, Sir Shackleton, it's not easy to say. I just need to drop the sir. We're not used to that anyway here in America. Shackleton eventually, he worked so hard, he pressed on in getting those men rescued from that island. And all 28 men made it and got back to Great Britain. Now, what Shackleton was hoping for was to bring back a story of the first crossing of Antarctica and how amazing a story that would have been. But what he brought back instead was a story of perseverance, a story of survival, and a story of great leadership. And even though that mission was, by all accounts, a great failure, they didn't even get really to Antarctica. They barely even got to the tip of it. Yet Shackleton has been lauded and was lauded as a hero ever since for his leadership. And I think of Tim talking about the leadership of Nehemiah last week. Sir Shackleton and Nehemiah, I think, would have been one and the same, cut from the same cloth. And here he was lauded for his leadership, for his perseverance, for his commitment to bring back this crew alive and to do everything he could to make sure that they survived. That was the story that was brought back. And so I wonder, is that the kind of story you think about? Is that the kind of thing you think about when you hear press on? A story of someone just gutting it out, a story of endurance, of survival, of commitment, maybe even stubbornness, right? And mostly those are worthwhile characteristics for someone who's trying to walk the Christian life, isn't it? Those are worthwhile characteristics. Oftentimes, as followers of God, we find ourselves trudging through the deep snow, do we not? Sometimes we find ourselves rowing on the tempestuous sea, right? The ocean fighting against us. Sometimes we find ourselves trying to climb up that ever-steepening mountain, trying to get to the other side and not knowing whether we ever will. Sometimes the Christian life feels like that. It feels like maybe just putting one foot in front of the other is about the most I can hope for at this point, right? You ever felt that way? And I think sometimes we think that's what it means to press on. The main verses for this morning, and really for the next few Sundays, are found, as I said earlier, in Philippians chapter 3, specifically verses 12 through 14. In the previous verses to those verses, Paul is telling the church in Philippi that he had gotten to a point in his life where all the achievements of his past life, all the things that he had used to value and hold dear, all of that meant nothing to him anymore. It was now lost, he considered it. This is his balance sheet of life, right? And he's saying, you know what, all of those things that everyone else would say, man, look at what you did. He said, nope, those are in the lost column now. And the only thing that I care about now is to know Christ. That's the only thing I put in the gain column at this point. I want to know Christ. In fact, he uses the word garbage, which is really an even worse word than that, but I'm going to stick with garbage this morning on Sunday morning in worship. And so he says, I consider it all nothing compared to the amazing knowledge of knowing Jesus Christ. And so here he is, he's saying that he wanted to know Christ as fully as he could, and he wanted to become like him as fully as he could. But in verse 12, here's what he has to say. He says, not that I have already attained this, or have already arrived at my goal. You see? You hear what Paul's saying right there? He says he wants to make sure that the Philippians know that this is something he is still going after. This is a goal he hasn't attained. He wants to know Christ. He wants to be like Christ in every way, but he's saying, I haven't got there yet. I haven't got there yet. It's a goal that I haven't achieved at this moment. It's something that I'm looking for. So what do I have to do, he says? I have to press on to take hold of that for which Christ Jesus took hold of me. In the next verse, he states, again, restates, brothers and sisters, I don't consider myself to have taken hold of it yet, right? I haven't done it yet. I'm not there yet. So one thing I do, you hear that? One thing I do, forgetting what is behind and striving towards what is ahead, I press on toward the goal, to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. Paul, he lets us know that as far as he had come, and he had come a long way at this point, God had completely transformed and turned this man's life around. But he says, as far as I've come, I'm not a finished product. I haven't arrived where I want to be yet. My journey is not done. And because it's not done, what I have to do is press on. In fact, he says it's the one thing he does. Did you hear that? He says there's only one thing that I do. I press on. And And because I think that we this morning as Christians understand that we will never be finished products, that we are always going to be a work in progress, and that becoming like Christ in all ways is a lifelong pursuit, right? It's something that we will strive for until the day we take our last breath. Then I think we sometimes think of it as a slow and plodding walk, right? It's an enduring journey that I just trudge through. However, the word that Paul uses here for press on is anything but a slow and plodding walk. It's a little bit more like this. You'll show the video.
With 6 different receivers, and this time he lofts one and it's picked off at the goal line. That's Buda Baker. Buda Baker out in front. Can Metcalf track him down? Can he chase him down? And he does to save a touchdown.
All right, I did not have written permission by the NFL to show that, but I did it anyway. That is more what Paul is talking about. That is, by the way, DK Metcalf, if you don't know, plays for the Seattle Seahawks. He is one of the most freakish athletes you will ever lay eyes on. And I say that with all due respect because the man is amazing. What he has done is transform himself into this elite athlete. And those of us who watch football, we see stuff like that, right? We see these chase down, these tackles, but that is an example of something you may never see again, the way that he chased down Buda Baker after that interception and saved that touchdown. And I realize that those of us who watch football, it's basically just watching a bunch of grown men chase each other around all day. But man, I love watching that, and I'm going to keep watching it. But that is such a great example here because this is what Paul is talking about. He's talking about a pursuit. He's talking about a chase. It means that to hunt down relentlessly, maybe even scarily. And I don't know if you thought DK Metcalf looked a little bit like a lion chasing a gazelle, but that look that Buda Baker gave at the end there, it looked like he felt like a gazelle getting chased down by a lion. That's what Paul is talking about, this word that he uses for press on. It is not a slow, trotting walk. It is a headlong sprint. It is a dead sprint, chase down, relentless pursuit. That's what Paul is talking about here. So what I think we need to talk about for the rest of our time this morning and probably for the next 3 weeks or so is not only how we persevere. I think that's important. I don't want to discount that. We do need to persevere. There are times when in our life it is a slow walk. But what I want to talk about is how we increase that pace. Is how can we, as the Hebrew writer puts it, throw off everything that hinders and entangles and run that race that's been marked out for us? How can we cut the distance in headlong pursuit after what Christ is wanting for us? Now, as I talk about that, let's be honest. Let's be honest with ourselves for a second. And admit that some of us this morning, we haven't been in the chase for a long time. Okay? Some of us have given up on the chase. We still put our running shoes on every once in a while. Maybe we dress the part and we act, maybe we even stretch a little bit and act like we're going to get out there and run. But we haven't been running. We haven't gotten up to any kind of speed in a long time. Some of us have slowed our pace so much that we're at a crawl at this point. And we're happy with that. We're good with that. That's all I want. I just want to kind of, slowly, methodically work towards Christ. And we're okay with that. But maybe we think, well, I'm never really going to reach it, so what's the point of trying too hard? Or maybe some of us think, well, I've already gotten so far, right? Look how far I've come. I'm good enough now. If I don't make it much further, that's all right. And so we've just slowed down in this pursuit of Jesus Christ. And I would hope this morning that if you feel like you're in either of those groups, I hope that this morning and over the next 3 weeks that Paul's example and his words will inspire you to get up and get going. Because we cannot just follow behind Christ at a slow, methodical path and walk. And we certainly can't sit on the sidelines and watch others do it. At no point in life is that okay for us as Christians. Paul is talking to us about moving forward. Sir Shackleton and his men, when they found themselves on that ice floe, they could have just said, well, This is it, guys. Let's just sit down and wait for the cold to freeze us over. They could have had every reason in the world to say that, and we might have never known the fate of the HMS Endurance and its crew. We never would have known what happened to them. But the will to survive and to save others drove Shackleton to press on, no matter what it took. DK Metcalf, he could have watched that interception happen. He could have said in his mind, I'm never going to catch up with this guy. None of us are. It's going to be impossible. In fact, none of us would have expected him of doing that, right? He could have said, I can give it a half-hearted attempt here and just act like I'm going to, or maybe just watch it happen, and no one's going to think any less of me because no one would have thought I could have caught that guy anyway. But yet, his will to give his team every possible chance to win that game wouldn't let him do that. All the work that he had put in, all the training that he put in, said, no, go get that guy, and he did. Paul could have continued in his self-righteousness, right, that was gained through the law. He could have, his status as a Pharisee, as a persecutor of Christians, he could have been content in all of that, keep chasing down that dream. But once he met Christ on that road to Damascus, he decided, I got to know this guy more. And the more he learned and knew Christ, the more he wanted to know, until that became the only pursuit of his life, to know Christ and to be like him. And that drove him to continue to press on towards his goal. Let's look at the phrase that Paul used in verse 12. Here Paul says, I press on to take hold of that for which Christ Jesus took hold of me. You see, Paul saw this pursuit, this pressing on as towards this goal. He saw it as taking hold of something. Taking hold of something. Later on, he would call it a prize. So we can think of the victor's crown, the gold medal, whatever you think of, the trophy, right? That the winner wins when they finish that race. But Paul says, I want to take hold of this thing. But notice that what he's trying to take hold of is that for which Christ Jesus had taken hold of him. I love Paul's phrasing here. He does this so often with his words, just this beautiful turn of phrase where he says, Christ has taken hold of me, and now what I want to do is press on to take hold of the reason why he took hold of me, right? That's now become the most important thing to me. And there are two important points that I think we need to comprehend here if we're going to increase our pace in this pursuit. First thing is here, again, that Paul admitted that everything he did was a response to what Christ did first. So often we talk about our faith, we talk about our Christian life, we talk about our decision to follow Christ as if we were the ones who made that decision. We're the ones who took hold of Christ. And Paul says, nuh-uh, Christ took hold of me. Christ took hold of me. Now we would know the exact point that he's talking about, right? It was on the road to Damascus when that blinding light came down, when he heard the voice of Jesus saying, Paul, what are you doing? I'm the one you're persecuting. And it was in that moment that Jesus took hold of Paul. And he never let go. And Paul never wanted him to. Paul loved what Christ did in that moment. Do you feel that Christ took hold of you? Do you think of it that way? Again, so often we focus on our decision, on what we've done. What about what Christ did in taking hold of you? Now, to take hold, it can mean a lot of different things, right? We can think of what DK Metcalf did, right? Running down Buda Baker. Do you feel like Christ has run you down and tackled you sometimes? You ever think of it that way? Maybe we would put it in different terms. Maybe we would say that Christ, he captured us. He seized us. That's the way Paul puts it in 2 Corinthians chapter 2. This is the imagery that he uses, and I noticed this morning in class he uses it in Ephesians as well. Paul uses this imagery of a captive, right? He says that thanks be to God because Jesus, our conquering general, is leading this amazing processional, right? This triumph processional. And where are we? We're in that procession. We're in that victory parade. But what are we? We're his captives. We're the ones who have been captured by Christ. And because we now belong to him, he has captured us. Now we spread his aroma everywhere we go because we belong to him. We are his. We are his captives. Do you feel captured by Christ at times? Maybe we could say that Christ took hold of us by securing us. That's another way of thinking about it, right? Giving us safety. Remember ever being swooped up when you were young by a parent, right? We do that when our child is hurt or in danger, right? We just scoop them up. We hold them close to safeguard them, to protect them, to use our bodies against whatever danger there is if we have to, right? Maybe that's what we think of when we think of taking hold, that Christ takes us up and safeguards us. Christ is our refuge, right? He is our strong tower, we say. He has the arms that can wrap around us and hold us safe and keep us safe, not just now in this life, but for eternity, forever. Or maybe you think of it this way: has Christ rescued you? Has Christ rescued you? Maybe he has snatched you from the flames of hell. Maybe he has plucked you from the evil of this world and its destruction. He has rescued you from the circumstances of your life that you grew up in or that you yourself put yourself in, and now he has taken you and he has gotten you out of that. I think of videos and pictures of the Coast Guard rescue swimmers diving into the ocean and hoisting those lost seas up into the Hilo, saving them, plucking them from the ocean, rescuing them. Peter reminds us in 2 Peter that if God could rescue Lot from the evil and the destruction of the wicked, depraved cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, then Christ can certainly save us and rescue us from all kinds of trials in this world and so much more. Do you feel rescued by Christ? What about this? Do you feel held by Christ? Now, there is a holding that is safeguarding, that is keeping safe, but then there is also a holding just to be held, isn't there? When you pull another person that you love close, right? When you just want them near you, when you clutch them to you because you love them so much and because you just want to be close to them. Casting Crowns has a song. I guess this is the morning we're going to talk about songs. Casting Crowns has the song Just Be Held. And the chorus begins with these words: when you're on your knees and answers seem so far away, you're not alone. Stop holding on and just be held. Just be held. The song is written, the whole song, from the perspective of Jesus, saying, I want to love you and hold you if you'll just let me. Now, to take hold it can mean so many things in so many different circumstances, can't it? And I hope some of those images help you. But the main reason that we don't experience this taking hold of what Paul is talking about here, is because sometimes we're like toddlers, aren't we? You ever try to hold a toddler when they don't want to be held? Some of you did that this morning, didn't you? It's the worst. You can't hold a toddler who doesn't want to be held, right? They're the masters of going limp. They're the masters of the wiggle and the arms flailing, right? And all of a sudden they weigh like twice as much as they should when they do that. You can't hold a toddler who doesn't want to be held. And that's how we are sometimes. Have you ever tried to hug a teenager who didn't want to be hugged? I mean, for all the warmth you get, you might as well hug a metal pole, right? Maybe a cactus, I don't know. I was the same way, guy. We were all the same way, right? This is what I'm talking about. We don't make it easy for God to take hold of us. In our immaturity and our rebellion, we fight God's embrace. I don't want to be held, right? That's how we are sometimes. And we go limp in the arms of Jesus. We huff and we puff when he tries to draw us near. We even push him away and run away when he's saying, all I want to do is take hold of you. All I want to do is hold on to you. Ultimately, taking hold is about laying claim. That's what it's about. Christ's desire is to make us his own. And far too often, we want to be our own, don't we? I want to be my own man or my own woman. I want to do it on my own. You hear the immaturity in that phrase, don't you? But if we want to learn to press on in this life, to pursue knowing Christ and being like him, one of the first things we have to understand is that we've got to let him take hold. We've got to let him take hold of us. And he doesn't want to just hold hands, lock elbows, or put his arm around us. He wants all of us. He wants to grasp us. He will never be satisfied with taking only a part of us. We can't have it that way. And we try to have it that way too sometimes, right? Okay, God, I'll let you have this much, but not the rest. It doesn't work that way. You can try to be your own man or woman in this world, and you can follow that deceptive lie all the way to your destruction if you want to. I want to be held by Christ. And I hope you do too. You can place yourselves in the arms of the Savior who loved you enough to die for you. Isn't that where you want to be? Those are our choices. To try to be our own or to be His. And the second thing that Paul teaches us here, and this is where we'll finish this morning. The second thing that he teaches us in this verse is that once Christ has taken a hold of us, then our focus of our life, all of our focus, has to shift to the reason why He has taken hold of us. And I think we understand this concept, right? When we get married, whether you have gotten married or you just know what marriage is, you understand, right? That when you get married and you commit yourself to another person, the shift of your life, the aim of your life changes. It has to. If it doesn't, you're not going to be married for very long. Because now you've got another person who you are now committed to, and every choice you make, every action you engage in is going to affect them. And you're responsible in many ways for them. When you have a child, the same thing happens, doesn't it? When you have a child, all of a sudden now this person needs you, and you're responsible for them. And your life has to shift. And sometimes most of us are not ready for it. We didn't understand it, right? But when it comes, we eventually get on board, don't we? And we go, man, I have to change the way I live. My focus has to shift. And if it doesn't, you become a very terrible parent, unfortunately. So we understand this idea, but what Paul is saying here is so much more than even either of those examples, because Paul understood that once Christ took hold of him, that all of his purposes and all of his motives for all that he was were now controlled by that truth, that he belonged to Christ. And so Paul, he used to pursue righteousness by the law. He used to pursue knowledge and power to move up the ranks of the scholars and the Pharisees. He used to pursue the followers of Christ, to rid the world of their blasphemy and heresy as he saw it, right? But then Christ got a hold of him, and everything changed. And what he pressed on towards changed too. And so my question this morning is, has it changed for you? If Christ has a hold of you, has your pursuit changed, or are you still pursuing the things of this world? Do you pursue actions in your life that bring you closer to God? Do you pursue experiences and knowledge that are going to make you more like Him? Do you go after the values and the desires of God so that you can take hold of what He's trying to give to you? Or are you still seeking your own ends and your own purposes? If Christ has taken hold of you, then you cannot any longer seek to take hold of the things of this world, because it's one or the other. And we are at times try to take on to Christ and try to hold on to the world, and we're going to lose Christ in doing so. Christ has taken hold of you, and if He has, you belong to Christ. It's now the time to chase after, to run after, to relentlessly pursue all that He has for you. This morning, if you haven't made that ultimate decision to commit yourself to Christ, let Him take hold of you. Maybe He has started to take hold of you, and maybe you're resisting. Maybe you're fighting Him on it. It's time to surrender. I look at it that way. I think that's a great word for it. We surrender to Christ. We give ourselves over to Him so He can take hold of us. If you need to make that decision this morning, we can baptize you into His name, into His death and His resurrection, so that He can truly take hold of you, and then you can start to take hold of what He has for you. If you have stopped pursuing God, now is the time to start. And if you need prayers for that or encouragement, we are here to help you with that. We would love to help you with that. Those of us who need to pick up our pace, let's do that. It's time for us to stop thinking of this as a trotting walk towards something, and then start looking at it as a headlong sprint towards Christ. Let's do that together. If you need anything this morning, will you come as we stand and as we sing?